The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 2, Chapter 941. Not what I expected. The orb ride was not long, and felt even shorter due to the incredible and enchanting views along the way. It was an enchanting experience, and Lex looked forward to the challenge of creating a space inside his inn where void dwellers could also come on vacation. Considering the fact that the inn was supposed to cater to everyone in the universe, it was expected that he would get guests who needed special environments to live in. But that would have to wait for the future, when Lex wasn't stuck in an existential crisis all the time. Lex imagined that, back in the day when the temple was operating normally, the view outside was very different. The temple probably wasn't hidden in the void back then. He wondered what it must have looked like. Losing himself in such normal thoughts for once was a refreshing change, so when the orb finally returned inside the temple and arrived at the destination, he was in a very good mood. The fact that he would see other people again after so long was also great. The orb finally reached the hall with all the workers, and Lex exited the orb to a soft murmuring from the countless conversation between all of them. Nobody recognized Lex, because, well, he wasn't a baby the last time they saw him. They just assumed he was a part of the temple. By now, thousands of projections had woken up and had given a small briefing to everyone about where they were, as well as forming lines to take the initial assessment. The clean environment, the professional attitude of the projections as well as the excellent service they were being provided quickly established an unsaid misunderstanding that spread amongst all the workers. They assumed, naturally, that this temple had been specially prepared for them by the Innkeeper. It made sense. The Innkeeper had long been preparing them for this eventual move all the way back from before the Great Invasion had happened. The addition of the security team, the guards, the battalion, and eventually even the 300 workers were all signs that the Innkeeper was getting ready to train them. It only made sense, and not just because they needed higher combat ability. Many of their guests were incredibly powerful, and they could not even cater to their requirements due to their current weakness. They also felt somewhat inadequate because the inn constantly hired security guards from the Reaving Dread mercenary group. It was not that they had problems with the group, just that they felt guilty for having the Innkeeper babysit them so, a facility specifically designed to train and strengthen them and only them seemed logical, and well within the capabilities of someone as powerful as the Innkeeper. The fact that the projections gave them vague details about the temple's background only served to enhance this misunderstanding. After all, telling them that a mysterious powerful being designed the temple to train and enhance the human race did nothing to dissuade them from connecting it to the Innkeeper. Even while she spoke, Cassandra's eyes stayed fixed on the card. But as soon as she was done, her projection faded, the card disappearing with her. She was not willing to delay the matter at all. It was too important. Once she left, Lex was left alone with Luther. For a moment he felt slightly awkward. He'd hardly interacted with the inn staff as himself, but the feeling did not last long. He really wasn't the type to dwell on such things. How was everyone once they returned? Any problems? I've heard that many people suffer from trauma after coming back from a war zone. Lex already knew the answer. He'd monitored everyone through his system. But it didn't hurt to hear the details directly from the source. It was an adjustment, suddenly coming back to a safe environment from the battlefield. But none of the battalion members had any real problems. Or rather, before there was an opportunity for a problem to manifest, Dr. Best took everyone's rehabilitation into his own hands. Despite how low his cultivation realm is, he is quite fearless and pushy. As it turns out, the stress relief from the hot tub room, the various patisserie snacks as well as Harry's haircuts is a lot more potent than I thought. It doesn't just get rid of your stress for the day. It literally gets rid of all one's worries that had been stored over time. He also forced me to spend a few weeks inside the gamer's den, playing a couple of games called Minecraft and Candy Crush. It was a different experience. I don't know about the rest, but he also spent a few good hours lecturing me on how I'm abusing my bloodline. The man is relentless. Yes, I've met him. He should have also arrived with this group, right? Yeah, you can see him right over there, Luther said, as he pointed towards a small crowd in the distance. He's arguing with a few different projections, claiming that his training routines are better and more thorough than theirs. Lex could not help but chuckle. Charles Best was a very interesting fellow, and he had extremely varied interests, and he was equally passionate about each one of them. He also knew many secrets that would be very helpful when the new realm was born. By the way, you should have also had something for me as well, Lex said, remembering something important. Luther nodded, and handed him a spatial bag that he had been carrying. Thanks, I really need this, Lex said as he observed the contents of the bag. It contained only one suit that matched his measurements. But, more important than appropriately sized attire, was the fact that the only purpose of the suit was to multiply Lex's control over space. For the next few months, that was the only thing he intended on training. After all, if Lex planned on taking advantage of a loophole to return to the inn, he needed to improve his control over space as much as possible. He already mastered blink. Now he just needed to master teleporting across trillions of light years with hundreds of thousands of workers. It shouldn't be a problem. Chapter 942 Meeting the Innkeeper. Cassandra's projection reappeared right over her sleeping chamber, as close to her physical body as possible. Propriety dictated that when meeting someone of the innkeeper's status, she should do so with her real body instead of a projection, but that wasn't possible. She was put to sleep for more than one reason, and she would not be able to wake up even if she managed to get permission to enter the newborn realm. But there was an alternative she could use, which was to prepare a weak clone. Even if she did not experience the new realm with her actual body, the benefits gained by the clone could be transferred to her main body through various means. That meant she'd be giving up on maximizing her gains, but such were the realities of life. She did not have such a clone ready at the moment, so all she could do was conjure her strongest, most realistic projection to meet the innkeeper. Although intimidated by the immensity of the innkeeper's aura, she had spent a long time surrounded by powers so powerful they were beyond human comprehension, so she was able to regain her poise fairly quickly. She did not need instruction on how to use the card, just holding it was enough for her to understand. When she was ready, she channeled a sliver of her energy into the card and watched as it began to shimmer bits of gold. The card gently flew out of her hand, and took the shape of a tall, handsome man. She lowered her eyes before his figure was completely formed, respectful of the dignity of a Dao Lord. Greetings, Innkeeper. My name is Cassandra Vans Agnew, daughter of Jacinda Vans Agnew, apostle of Mother Nuwa. I apologize for not meeting you in person, but my body has been put to sleep by means far beyond myself. There is no need for apologies, especially for one who has been hosting some of my workers, the innkeeper said, his voice itself a conduit for some laws. Cassandra could not tell the details, but from the way she suddenly felt relaxed and at peace, she suspected his voice was filled with the laws of charm and peacefulness, and perhaps a few others mixed together. She had seen this phenomenon before. It was not a result of actively adding laws to one's voice, but a result of the sheer magnitude of the influence of a cultivator on certain laws. Which laws get added to the voice often represent the kind of laws a cultivator is proficient in, almost revealing their nature as a result. The Midnight Inn can reach every corner of the universe. No place is restricted, he said with a warm smile, as if he was saying the simplest thing. Of course, I have not yet opened the doors of the inn to the whole universe. Once my workers grow, and are ready to face the challenge, I will steadily welcome more and more guests to the inn. The innkeeper paused, as Cassandra tried to grasp the magnitude of the innkeeper's claim. But he did not wait long, and continued the conversation in a different direction. The Midnight Inn is a place I opened up so that weary travelers can find sanctuary and relaxation, a haven where they may rest on their laurels. Normally, I would turn no guest away so long as they obey the rules of the inn. But the inn is undergoing some renovations, and to avoid any accidents in which my guests might get hurt in the process, I have temporarily stopped letting in new guests. But I hear that you want to visit the inn? A million thoughts raced through Cassandra's head as she thought of the best way to phrase her request. She thought over their entire exchange, studying each and every word the innkeeper had said and what it could possibly mean. Ultimately, she concluded that he was giving her an opportunity by bringing up her request first. She merely needed to explain her reasons, clearly and truthfully. Perhaps the innkeeper was pleased with the temple for taking care of his workers, so he was giving her an easy opportunity. She could think of no other reason. Lord Innkeeper, since the fall of the apostles, the human race has suffered tremendously. Currently, the only reason they have any standing in the universe at all is because of the backing of Mother Nuwa, but even that is just the bare minimum. Without at least one Tao Lord to create a holy land for humans, and lead the fight in the realm wars, we run the risk of falling even further, and going beyond the point of redemption. I heard from Lex that you plan on moving your inn to a newborn realm. If I could experience the process of a new realm establishing its rules and creating its foundation, I believe it could provide me with a great boost, and allow me to finally touch upon the Tao. I have borne the responsibility for the human race on my shoulders since the day I was born, so I must plead with your eminence to allow me this opportunity. The human race will forever be grateful. Cassandra bowed deeply as she put forward her request. Lex had planned out how to proceed long before the meeting had even happened, but for some reason, her words reminded him of Cornelius II, king of the Hum nation in the Crystal Realm. It was not because they had similarities in their beliefs, no. It was actually because of how different they were. Not that Lex believed even 10% of what Cornelius claimed, but the man had told his son that the reason he did not want to end the war with the Craven was because he wanted the human race as a whole to grow. If only a few could prop up the whole race, while the rest only enjoyed the fruits of their labor, then it would be meaningless. Only if the entire race grew and prospered would they truly deserve to escape the threat of annihilation. Although he had not talked to Cassandra in depth, and did not know her background and experiences, the little she had stated was the exact opposite of Cornelius. It was so interesting how two people in a position of power had such differing views. Suddenly, Lex had an idea. It took hold of his entire being. Chapter 943, Sundara. A part of Lex told him that he should not conduct social experiments on immensely strong cultivators who could influence the fate of his race over the entire universe. That part was his brain. But at the same time another part of him argued, like a tiny devil sitting on his shoulder wearing the notorious anonymity mask whispering in his ear, that if Cassandra were so easily influenced then even if he never did anything, she would likely go astray down the line. He should have confidence in her ability to think for herself and make her own decisions. Moreover, since this was a matter very much related to him as it would influence his entire race, he was entirely eligible to have an opinion of it. His experiences on Earth, however limited they may be, told him that anything easily given is often taken advantage of, and not valued. Of course, he could not say for certain that the human race was taking it easy, since he did not know the universal status of humans. But from Cassandra's words, it seemed like she was planning on bearing the burden of the entire race on her own. That was not a good long-term solution. How would you go to the inn with your body in its current state? The innkeeper asked, the question sparking hope in Cassandra's heart. Although my main body will stay asleep, I can fashion a weak clone. I can use various enchantments to hide the clone, due to its low level, so it won't be an issue for it to leave the temple. A few more things clicked into place in Lex's mind. With her help, transporting everyone back to the inn would actually be much easier. I closed the Midnight Inn so that my guests would not accidentally get hurt. But you seem a little more capable than the rest. It should not be an issue to allow you to come in. Even though, technically speaking, she was just one realm below the Tao Lord realm, she could not imagine what it must be like. That one realm was the difference between being at the top of the universe in terms of power, or at the bottom. She concluded that even before the innkeeper arrived, he had already decided to accept her as a guest. She could only attribute that decision to Lex speaking in her favor, for she could not think of any other reason why he would allow her to come despite locking down the inn. She could not help but smile. He behaved so coldly towards her, but was actually looking out for her. Wasn't there a term for that? Sundara? She'd learned of it when she was reading the memories of the devils who had invaded the temple. With her contemplation complete, she decided to get to work. Creating a suitable clone would require some effort on her part, as well as some resources from the temple. She should also get to Lex. If returning to the inn depended on him, she had to make sure he was completely up to the task. When she reappeared in the hall with the workers, she found Lex and Luther still standing in the same place. They were looking out at the pup Fenrir, who Lex had summoned, who was being swarmed by hundreds of workers while he tried to run from them. Fenrir, alongside Little Blue, had more or less become the mascot of the inn, so his absence had been strongly felt by many of the workers. Now that he was here, they wouldn't miss a chance to pet him, even if they had to capture him first to do it. Chapter 944 Training Montage. I. Had your fun? Cassandra asked, her expression once again completely neutral. If Lex himself had not seen how nervous and expressive she had been in front of the innkeeper, he may have believed she really was just like that. Now he knew that a bunch of golden core cultivators just weren't enough to elicit a reaction from her. I was just telling him what kind of training he and the others can expect, Lex said, but then paused, turned to look Cassandra in the eye, and continued, and the kind of things they won't need to face. Cassandra could not help but chuckle. Lex was trying to give her a silent reminder of their agreement, but now that her impression of him had changed, all she could see was a cute little baby looking up at her. Well, I'm glad that you've given them an idea of what to expect. But I think now it's time to focus on other matters. The innkeeper informed me that I have to help you in returning everyone back to the inn. I can only imagine that he meant I have to train you for the task. So, let's go. I'm going to be increasing the intensity of your training. For some reason, Lex's body trembled. That was strange, because Lex himself planned on asking for her help. The more he grew his control over space, the easier it would be to actually pull off his task. So then, instead of being pleased, why did he suddenly feel dread at the fact that Cassandra was going to train him? Dismissing the strange reaction, Lex bade Luther farewell and followed Cassandra to the orb they had parked. The ride back was somehow even shorter as Lex was lost in planning his immediate future. Even when they arrived at their destination, Lex followed Cassandra silently as he considered the timelines for various things in his mind. When Cassandra finally woke him from his reverie, he was startled to find himself sitting at a table with something that looked suspiciously similar to a croissant and a cup of hot chocolate in front of him. The liquid presented a number of strange behaviors in various circumstances, and Lex had to experience each and every one of them. It affected space in such a way that it detached itself from the location aspect of existing in space. In simple terms, the liquid teleported randomly, and the distance it could teleport was theoretically infinite. It could even traverse between realms. By being completely submerged and filled by the liquid, Lex experienced that teleportation as if he were the liquid. But after 6 hours of being teleported across the temple while in a state of drowning, Cassandra informed Lex that that had just been the warm-up. Their training was officially going to begin after that. Cassandra did not focus on any other aspect of space, and solely focused on teleportation. Between being flung through space and squeezing through self-created, externally contained wormholes, Lex completely lost track of time. There was no day or night, no breakfast or dinner. He would eat when he had expended a certain amount of energy, and he would sleep when his performance dropped by more than 2%. The minutes and hours were indistinguishable, so that Lex had no idea how much time was passing. Eventually, when Lex felt like several months must have gone by, he asked Mary how long it had been. She told him merely 6 days had passed. That's when Cassandra informed him of how space travel messes with time perception. In essence, it messes things up. After the first 2 weeks, Lex steadied himself finally. Whether he was cooked in boiling space, dragged through distorting space, pushed through a portal that had only an entrance but no exit, he no longer cared. He could overcome difficulties. Heck, on the day when Lex tried out Blink and realized that his range had grown by 3 times, Lex wholeheartedly threw himself into Cassandra's crazy training sessions. After a month, Lex no longer suffered the debilitating soul nausea that would affect him if he traveled through a poorly made teleportation formation. He had overcome a number of other obstacles as well, and his control over space was increasing so fast he had trouble comprehending his own new capabilities. When the second month began, Cassandra told him that since he had finally become desensitized to basic spatial issues, they could begin his real training. Chapter 945 Training Montage 2. The minutes, hours, days, and weeks blurred together as his training continued. He had not been pushed to the extent that he had been when he was overcoming Dragon's Might, but that did not mean this was any easier. Cassandra was very meticulous about making sure he always remained in peak performance condition. From getting enough sleep, to eating nutritionally rich foods, to specialized massages to allow his muscles to recover quickly, to many more things, she made sure that he could always push further, which was a strange mix of exhausting and refreshing. At some point, Lex ended up informing Cassandra that his cultivation technique helped him acclimatize to harsh conditions. He obviously did not tell her the details and extent of his technique's capabilities, but just even that was amazing. She then proceeded to add cultivating in increasingly hazardous conditions to the schedule. Lex had already informed her of the timetable he intended to keep, but he could not help but ask Mary to inform him as time passed as well because the days seemed to stretch on forever. But that just seemed to confirm how slowly time was actually passing by. Maybe it was because Lex had never been as efficient and diligent with his time in his life, where every second of every day was utilized fully, which caused him to feel like the days were too long. By the third month, Lex clearly noticed how his perception and control over space were drastically improving. He reached the point where blink became like second nature to him, and he would not get exhausted from it no matter how many times he did. Now he began training in more specified stuff. Although blink was also technically teleportation, its functionality was rooted in very different concepts than those of actual teleportation. Whether it was long range or short range, teleportation was an ability which had a far larger range than blink, and was technically much more stable and secure. At the same time, it was more energy-intensive, which was predictable. A majority of all workers reached the foundation stage, which was a massive boost, and those that had already reached the foundation realm made good progress. A few of the workers even broke into the golden core realm. The fact that this was even possible within a single year of cultivating was a testament to the great environment at the inn, as well as the benefits gained from experiencing star rating increases. The free resources and excellent guidance were just the cherry on top, at least for the first few months. Once all the workers had tapped out of their abundant accumulation, their true cultivation journeys began. But not all workers were focused just on cultivation. Much in the way Lex had focused solely on teleportation, many workers selected specializations they liked. The big three, alchemy, treasure manufacturing and formations, were always popular, and so got a large number of workers learning them. But many also focused on more specific niches, such as cooking, landscaping, farming, talisman making, medicine, and more. The temple, a literal bastion of all knowledge pertaining to humans, was the perfect place to learn many of these professions that focused on human needs. Luther, unexpectedly, did not take any combat or cultivation-related lessons. Instead, he focused on becoming a better assistant to the innkeeper. Gerard took lessons in security management. Velma learned how to be a better detective. Regis, the inn-worker who was completely invisible and forgotten by everyone, focused solely on learning how to take control of his abilities and once again becoming visible. Jace, the worker who had gained earth manipulation powers and made a fort for the battalion, went into architecture. Everyone was extremely focused, so many months later, when Z finally woke up and emerged, he was startled to find countless inn-workers running around with no time to chat. Completely confused about what was happening, he walked around the temple trying to get someone to explain the circumstances, but no one seemed to have the time. Chapter 946 Training Montage 3. The temple buzzed with activity after a long, long time. The workers did not get to experience the slight lag many of the rooms had displayed when Lex had first arrived, but as more and more rooms were opened up and put into use, everyone could somehow tell that the temple was somehow in better condition. The air somehow smelled fresher, the energy was more vibrant, and the services had an extra edge to them that no one could quite pin down. But the results spoke for themselves. None of the inn workers was ever lazy, and they all had excellent qualifications in almost every sense. But after months of grueling training, whether it be in combat, cooking, or chiropractic therapy, they had improved considerably. By the standards of the temple teachers, they were not yet shining gems, but they had definitely undergone a polish. With that polish came the accompanying confidence. The workers all underwent a boost in confidence. Most of them never personally interacted with the innkeeper, and so were never directly influenced by him. While the likes of Gerard, Velma, and Luther were excellent examples of the heights a worker could achieve, it was a fact that they all got confidence boosts from interacting with the innkeeper. The rest of the workers, in a position of service to countless guests, almost all of whom had a higher cultivation level, began developing somewhat of a servile nature. If it were not for the extremely supporting environment developed between the staff members, the situation would have been even worse. But there was nothing that built true confidence better than working hard and experiencing the benefits of one's hard work themselves. At the same time, they worshipped the innkeeper even more. He had made such an amazing temple and given them such an excellent opportunity, without asking for anything in return. Jeeves, who had joined at the last minute, nearly fell to his knees and wept when the temple taught him a cultivation technique centered around creating the most exceptional cloves. Hera, one of the few hires of the inn, had a much tougher time than the rest. She was not born with the inherent talent that the rest of the inn workers arrived with, nor did she have a bloodline at all. But the one thing she had was a memory seared into her brain of her son, Jimmy, crying secretly at night because he lost his first friend, Layla. Layla's family, coming from a prestigious background affiliated with the Jotun Empire, did not approve of the extended time she was spending with Jimmy, and fearing that some feelings might develop between the children harshly separated them. Though kids in general were resilient, he had since bounced back from the incident. Moreover, the Midnight Inn was an excellent place to live, and Jimmy was growing wonderfully. He had come out of his introverted shell somewhat, and still hung out with his other friends. But she never wanted anyone to look down on her son again for any reason. She would give him the best of everything. At the same time, she also realized that as a cultivator, she had a long life in front of her, and she wanted to live it well. So she trained, and she trained hard. Though her initial progress was slow, as the months went by, she began surpassing the other workers in terms of progress. She had undergone a complete metamorphosis, and no longer seemed inferior amidst the highly talented crowd of workers. Countless others experienced a similar nirvana, but Lex did not have time to focus on them. He was training as if his life depended on it. But, one day, when he woke up from his sleep, he was oddly not rushed to the breakfast table where he would get a briefing of the horrors that awaited him the next day. For a moment, the lack of the expected push confused him. Then a thought occurred to him. "Mary, how long before the new realm is born?" 1.5 months, she answered promptly. Just as he thought. His training period was officially over. Chapter 947, Spatial Anchor. The sudden freedom left Lex slightly disoriented. Every second of every day for the past few months had been a tough journey for him. For it to end so suddenly and without warning was a bit disconcerting. But he got over the feeling quickly. It was hard to complain about having it rough when physically he was in perfect condition. His mental health would recover when he relaxed in the hot tub room like Luther had suggested. He stepped out of his sleeping pod, possibly for the last time, and made his way to where, no doubt, a lavish feast was waiting for him. He entered the room to find a pale-looking Z, trembling at the table. As it turned out, Lex was both right and wrong. The spread prepared for him was grand, but it was none of the delicious and mouth-watering food he had so gotten used to. Instead, it was a feast of food that would temporarily boost his spatial affinity, perception, and control. He'd had some of it before during training, so he knew what it was like. It would induce a specific kind of nausea that space travel turbulence caused. Fortunately, he had built up a resistance to it. Unfortunately, it was just resistance and not immunity. "Do I have to eat all of that?" Lex asked reluctantly. Cassandra, who did not teleport but walked in with her newly created clone, said, "That's up to you now. I've trained you the best I could in the time I had. But you're the one who knows how to get to the inn. You have to judge for yourself what you'll need to do." That was just a polite way of saying yes. He would need every advantage he could take. He sat down, for once not in a rush, and began slowly nibbling on the revolting food. The issue with this, in particular, was that it was the uncooked body parts of a certain type of worm that tunneled through space. The purpose of the registry was simple. His guests could sign it, and the registry would automatically judge the achievements they had in their lives, and then rank them. The top 1,000 guests could use the registry as a spatial anchor. There were greater rewards for the top 100, 10, and 1, and all of them seemed to be anchors of some kind. Back then, Lex did not understand what the anchors represented, though he had some theories. Lex himself had occupied the top position in the registry for a very long time. He wasn't sure if he was still the top one, as he had not bothered to check. What was more important was that he still retained the registry as a spatial anchor. An anchor served as a set of coordinates that he could sense regardless of where he was. But, more importantly, if he tried to move through space towards his anchor, it would be exponentially easier than a normal set of spatial coordinates. He had tested out if he could feel the spatial anchor even though the inn had stopped accepting guests, and indeed he could. Now, all he needed to do was use teleportation and move towards his anchor. Although theoretically it should be fine, according to the information he had read in the temple as well as the spatial affinity book, which he eventually gave to Z after reading. Now, he just needed to put that theory to the test. After meditating for a few hours, there came a certain point where Lex knew he was just procrastinating. He could not be more prepared than he was at that moment. He ate food that would boost him, and was wearing the suit that augmented his spatial control. He had a planet loaded up with energy on his back. Now all that was left was to actually do it. Chapter 948 Test Run. "Mary, I'm starting now. Keep track of time for me." There was no longer any point in delaying. Lex closed his eyes and focused all his attention on sensing the spatial anchor. Since he now knew what to look for, and his affinity, perception, and spatial control were all boosted beyond his max, it should be much easier now. True to expectation, Lex was able to quickly feel a certain kind of pull towards a direction he could not sense. The pull did not have any force behind it, and was just there. But he could also tell that if he channeled any energy into that feeling, the force of the pull would become significant. For the sake of security, he spent some time feeling the pull, ensuring that the connection did not randomly disrupt, and that he was sure that it really was the registry. After several hours, when he was sure that the connection was stable, he began. In the way that he had been doing almost every day for the past few months, he focused in on the coordinates he wanted to teleport to, and activated his ability. The only difference was that, as an anchor, the coordinates provided him with some extra help. Everything was familiar. Everything was following the same process he had been through thousands of times. Space unfolded around him, as if opening up to let him into a deeper layer, usually closed off. Time seemed to fade alongside the effects of gravity. His body, just a moment ago, sitting in the meditation chamber, entered a strange place without color. When traversing through space, it did not matter if one was sitting or standing. What was more important was the incredibly thin layer of protection around the body, which was a part of the teleportation ability, which protected the user from the chaotic influence of the deeper layers of space. But the effects of that protection were limited, which is why long-range teleportation is not recommended for low-leveled cultivators. "Mary, how long did it take?" Lex asked in his mind, for his body was genuinely too drained to obey him at the moment. "You began your teleportation 4 days ago." In his mind, Lex fist pumped. It was possible. If he did it once, he could do it again, and this time with the others. It would by no means be an easy or pleasant experience, but he was confident in bringing everyone across alive. After that, if they were weak or wounded, they could enter the recovery pods, like he had. Regardless, the main pressure of teleportation would be borne by him, no one else. Mary, I'm going to rest for a bit. If I don't wake up before then, wake me up in a couple of days. I can't waste too much time. Even without thinking about it, Lex used the divination protection technique and allowed himself to fall asleep. The sleep that followed was deep and extremely restful. Even though the temple had been great, there was just something about being home that it could not replace. As it turned out, for once, Lex did not need Mary to wake him up. His body had grown much stronger and his recovery had improved as well. That, alongside the aid of the recovery pod, meant that he was ready to go back in just under 10 hours. Before returning to the temple, Lex deposited the missiles back in their place, as well as all the weapons he had been carrying around with him. It was not exactly the best idea to go on risky trips through space carrying around extremely volatile weapons that made even Cassandra nervous. It had been so long, he felt a little reluctant to leave the inn. But he had an important task, so he could not delay. In a single instant, he teleported back to the temple. It was time to bring everyone back with him this time. Chapter 949 Teleportation I. As much as he hated to admit it, the air quality in the temple surpassed the inn. So did the quality of energy. It was rare that he would leave the inn and not miss its soothing environment, but the temple was an exception to that. For now. There were many other things that the temple did better than the inn as well, but only one of them interested Lex at the moment. Mateo's projection appeared in front of him, looking relieved. It had been many days since Lex disappeared and they were starting to get worried. "Everything all right?" he asked, surveying his body to see for any missing limbs. They were all there. Yes. It took almost 4 days to complete the teleportation, and I suffered from extreme physical fatigue afterwards, to the point where I could not even pick myself off the ground. "Come on, let's get you checked out first," Mateo said, not even waiting for Lex to complete his story, causing the baby to chuckle. It was clear that the projection was extremely worried about him. But he had the same idea. The medical facilities of the temple were much better than the inn's, and so would be able to better diagnose him if there were any issues. The place that Lex had teleported to was one of the natural entrances of the temple, which is where the rest of the workers had arrived as well when they did. This was likely a result of Lex's subtle tweaks to the system's teleportation rules, which would only teleport people to where they had the authority to be. Regardless, because of his location of arrival, Lex got to see countless workers, sitting and resting all throughout the halls. Since they would be departing soon, and would need to be in peak physical condition for that, their training had come to a close. Although most of them did not have training as strenuous as Lex's, they also didn't have his resilience and mental toughness. They were exhausted, and it would take more than an empty schedule for them to recover. A massive teleportation formation had been drawn on the floor, with Lex sitting in the middle. Anyone familiar with formations would know that the most integral part of the formation was missing. That was because Lex would take over the role of that part of the formation. The rest of the formation was simply there to assist Lex in bringing everyone with him, while doing its utmost to stabilize the journey as much as possible. This one would be a lot more turbulent than the one Lex took the first time, due to the number of people being taken. But with the assistance of external support, mainly the formation, they should fare just fine. It wasn't as if they hadn't considered taking multiple trips with a smaller number of people each time, but due to how much time they expected to spend teleporting all of them, they just wouldn't have the time for multiple trips. The workers, who were all wearing a specific set of armor provided by the temple, took their spots in the formation. The arrangement was not random, as the strongest ones were on the outer edges, while the weaker ones were closer to Lex. This was designed so that they would not have to face the effects of turbulence as much. "Everyone, get ready," said the baby, surrounded by over 100,000 people. "I will begin in 10 minutes. All the workers nodded, and took some medicine which had been provided to them, and then linked hands with one another, forming a massive chain. Cassandra, who was the strongest, was right next to Lex, and was the last link in the chain. The reason she was next to him instead of being outside was because she needed to fuel Lex's ability with her own energy, which would require physical contact. Lex opened his eyes, and began. Chapter 950 Return. Unlike his first attempt at returning, which began instantaneously the way teleportation usually worked, this time the process was slow and drawn out. A wave of energy spread out slowly, as if a viscous liquid were flowing down a slope. This was the spatial energy which would form a barrier around them all, and it was slow and weak due to Lex's low cultivation realm. Already, before the teleportation had even begun, Lex needed to tap into the energy reserve of Lotus just to ensure the barrier was completed. But, then again, the start of the teleportation was also the most expensive in terms of energy consumption, so it made sense. None of the workers moved, as even though the barrier around them had not formed, they could feel the process had begun, and a heavy weight pressed down on them. After an exaggerated few minutes, the barrier was complete, and all of them vanished. The drain of the first instance of teleportation nearly caused Lex to fall unconscious, but several medicines that he had taken in advance kicked in, and prevented it from happening. Cassandra also began channeling her energy inside of him, while simultaneously healing him from his fatigue. She should not have been able to do that, but then again, Lex could not comprehend the powers of celestial immortals, even if enacted through a weak clone. His already tiny body had withered visibly, to the point where he no longer had cute round cheeks. Instead, he was as bony as a malnourished child. It could not be helped, since Lex was to bear the brunt of this teleportation. In fact, if it were not due to how resilient his body was, he would have exploded just from the attempt. But he had to hold on, for he knew the fate of everyone was in his hands. What he didn't know was that everyone's condition was much worse than they anticipated. The journey had already gone on for an unknown amount of time, and every one of the workers were reaching their limit. There was only so much pure willpower could do. That's when it happened. Lex's Empyrean resonance physique activated, and its aura traveled uninterrupted by the turbulent space around them. In fact, the aura seemed to absorb the turbulence, drastically reducing it, before it began to caress the weakened bodies of all those within the protective film. Soon, for reasons they could not comprehend, they started to feel as if the pressure on them was reducing. At first it was only a minor relief, but the longer this went on, the greater the benefit they received. Even Cassandra was affected by it, and her clone underwent subtle changes. This was extremely dangerous, considering their precarious situation. The slightest disturbance in evolution would cause them to die, or at the very least suffer drastic repercussions. But there was nothing any of them could do about it. Lex did not even know it was happening, as all his focus was ensuring the technique didn't fail. Then, the next moment, without any warning, it was over. They found themselves at the entrance of the inn, on the welcoming platform. The protective film around them vanished, and most of them fell to their knees. But while their bodies struggled to cope with the sudden return of gravity, their minds were filled with elation. They had done it. They had survived. They had returned. Grins and sighs of relief filled the massive crowd, even as they knew that they would need many days of rest after this. But only one person did not have such a reaction, for as soon as the teleportation ended, Lex collapsed. He was utterly spent and his already tiny body shrunk even more. He curled up into the fetal position, though that was pure instinct, for Lex was already unconscious. For the first time since he had learned it, Lex fell asleep without using the technique to protect him from divination. Chapter 951 Troubling Visions. On some deep level, Lex knew he was dreaming. But that knowledge did not reflect in any change. He was like a spectator, looking down on himself, but at the same time, feeling all the feelings that his dreamed self was experiencing. He was being hunted. Something had locked onto him by means he could not understand. It had used something to lock him in place, and prevent him from returning to the inn. The lock was not actually something that directly blocked him, but something that created an urgent need. Even at the risk of being discovered, even at the risk of great harm, he could not escape. He needed to reach, he needed to find. Before the thought could be complete, a familiar pressure he now understood as dragons might enveloped him, and a massive yellow eye appeared. Then darkness fell, and the dream transitioned. Another dream came from the darkness, revealing a dance flood. A dark ominous figure stood at the opposite end of Lex, and a hooting crowd surrounded them. Darkness descended, and the dream ended once more. He saw a jungle filled with the most viscous beasts imaginable, and a massive cavalry charging through astride magnificent, great peacocks. He saw an army of caped Marzu marching to war. He saw the collapse of civilizations. He saw a planet, ominous and full of malevolent intent, swallowing its star system. He saw his beloved door, left alone at the temple of fasting, behind countless chains. It's been a little over 2.5 weeks since you all returned. Your condition is extremely strained. The lady who brought you in, Cassandra, comes every day to check up on your condition. She has stated that even if you heal completely, your meridians are extremely strained and will need time to recover. She gave Nurse Jubilation a serum that she said should help you. Lex smiled weakly. Cassandra was very thoughtful, and whatever serum she gave would probably help him a lot if he took it. But in her considerations, she could not account for the fact that Lex had a cultivation technique that strengthened him against whatever weakness he was experiencing. A few good cultivation sessions, and he should be good to go. But before he got up and went about dealing with the no doubt countless chores that awaited him, he could not help but think back to the last dream. As devastating as it was, the thing he found most prominent in the dream was the fact that he was still a baby in it. This was the second time he had a dream about the inn being destroyed by fire, though some details had changed between the two dreams. The first time he had the dream, he was in his regular form, meaning that he had not been reduced to his baby form. But in the more recent one, he was a baby. The fact that some details changed was reassuring, which meant that even his future prophecies were not exactly accurate, or even liable to happen. But the fact that this dream had occurred twice was worth consideration. There was one more dream which had repeated, and fortunately it was not the one where he identified as a banana. Or perhaps it was unfortunate, because it was the one he was being hunted in. Although, this time, in that particular dream, he was not a baby. But the reappearance of these dreams unsettled him. He tried to anticipate what kind of danger the inn could potentially face in the near future, since he was a baby in that dream. There was only one possibility he could identify, though there was no way of knowing for sure. If his newly developed realm was discovered, he was sure that it would face an invasion. But the inn had a destiny-level formation hiding it, so that should have been unlikely. Or did he perhaps need to upgrade the protection to the level of death, or perhaps even higher? These thoughts plagued him for quite a while. Chapter 952 Divine. Whatever the problem was, sitting around and just thinking would not help him avoid it. Besides, there was no guarantee it would even actually happen. He decided to consult Vera, the oracle and his perpetual consultant regarding all matters relating to divination. He could ask Cassandra as well, but she was too knowledgeable about things he could not even imagine. The chances of him slipping up were extremely high, so the less he talked to her about things related to the inn, the better. "Mary, is there anything I need to pay attention to at the inn?" he asked as he tried to plan out his next steps. Surprisingly not. Most of the workers who returned alongside you are still resting as well. They were not able to completely overcome the stress of teleporting over such a long distance as easily as you. But there's no serious injuries to speak of. The rest of the workers are handling the guests well, and there are no particular issues to take care of. There is a massive backlog of applicants who wish to join the inn, if you want to peruse those, but a majority of them are just Velma's fans. I don't know how good of a fit they would be. Although, there is a clan of elves, where the entire clan wishes to join the inn. They're currently living here as well, so you can look into them. The number of devil applicants has also gone up, but almost all of them want to negotiate their terms of service. Besides that, there's not much else that needs your immediate attention. The number of people who wished to join the inn was always high, but Lex hardly ever accepted them. It was too much of a risk accepting people with entire lives before they arrived at the inn, and the potential for problems was quite high. But then, of course, there were some who had skills and knowledge that would be an excellent addition to the inn. If any applicant had a recommendation from one of his workers, he would also view it seriously, because that hardly ever happened. But at the moment, Lex did not need more workers, so the applications could wait. He got out of the recovery pod, and immediately groaned. His entire body ached, as if he were an old man with severe arthritis. Dara looked incredibly vexed by the matter, much to Lex's amusement. "I have to say, that is not what I was expecting," Lex said while he chuckled. The train blew a whistle, and then slowly began moving along its tracks. No one else was in this cabin, a rarity on the popular train. But the low number of guests these days has allowed this scene to occur naturally and without any preparation. Dara looked at him, feeling slightly annoyed, but then calmed herself down and grabbed her own drink. "So this is the part where I give you some advice, without asking what your actual problems are. Although, I've never really worked with a baby before." "Being a baby is not so bad," Lex said, sitting on his 4 pillows so that his head would be above the table, between himself and Vera. "I only have 2 pieces of advice for you. First, you should really visit the wishing well, preferably soon. The second is that in exactly 5 years, and I mean exactly 5 years, to the day, you should visit a planet called Yildirim Utopia. Don't be in a rush to pay me back for this. When the time comes, you can pay me whatever you think this information was worth." Lex raised his eyebrow. 5 years? None of this advice seemed to have to do anything with his dreams. Or perhaps the answer for his dream problem lay at the wishing well. This was really a good time to try it out. "Thanks," Lex said as he took a sip from his drink. It tasted divine. Chapter 953 Nexus. Lex did not teleport away after getting the information he needed. It would be quite rude. Besides, considering that Vera had chosen this as the location for their meeting meant that she wanted to have a lengthy conversation, probably. But he wasn't in a rush to start the conversation himself either. For a time, he just sat in silence and enjoyed the view. The scenery was like something out of a cartoon, as so much of the flora was now from different planets. While Lex's favorite remained the purple crystal trees, the turtle had been especially busy in adapting endless types of plants to the environment of the inn. For that he also introduced many new kinds of insects, which had now spread across the space of the inn, and already gone through several generations. Fortunately, the newborn insects counted as in workers, so Lex ordered them to stay out of sight when guests were around so as to not observe them. He did not, however, interfere in their food chain. So the many birds and animals ate insects, the insects devoured the dead leaves, and the feed left out for them by the workers, and the soil was nourished by their actions. Between this all, some animals fought with one another as well, and on a few occasions, left behind a few corpses for the insects to feast on. All of this happened well out of sight of his guests. But it was also interesting how different animals, which were a part of the inn and obeyed his orders, continued their original food chain despite being fellow workers of the inn. That meant the system did not actually stop inn workers from harming one another. Or perhaps, this was only limited to species with limited to no knowledge. Lex turned his gaze to the sky, and saw the tiny, floating city pass by. There was also a strange bird he had never seen before, but a quick scan revealed that it was actually a guest beast. Though Lex's body was still aching due to the fact that it had not completely recovered, his mind felt increasingly at peace as he observed the changing scenery. "It's nice, isn't it?" Vera asked, her voice strangely somber. "Oddly enough, before coming to the inn, I always preferred living in a metropolis. But here, I seem to have developed a strange fondness for such a peaceful environment." Lex did not answer immediately, as he allowed his thoughts to wander as well. He felt strangely similar. Wasn't that also why he had moved to New York? Honestly, he had been so busy that he even forgot about it completely. "Nothing too major," she said nonchalantly, as if countless people had not traversed entire realms to get golden keys to attend the meeting. As a result, the golden keys of the Midnight Inn had also spread across multiple other realms, though none of those keys had been used yet. "We just all discussed the fact that a Nexus event is approaching in the future, and will likely result in the death of many oracles. We simply discussed a few precautions. What's a nexus event? Lex asked, curiously. They had finally gotten to Vera's main concern. A nexus event is, how should I put this? Treat fate as something that can be predicted, for a moment. But, when too many major events with incalculable repercussions take place close together, they not only obscure fate, they completely destroy the ties of fate. Once the nexus event passes, the ties of fate reconnect, just as they were before. But if one knows what they are doing, they can simply change their fate, or perhaps even hide from it. A nexus event is an event that causes even destiny to fail, if only for a short time. It is a time full of extreme peril, and at the same time, extreme opportunities. Vera paused, as she looked at the baby, trying to observe its expressions for any indication of what he was thinking. But a baby was too difficult to read. Their expressions were all over the place. I take it that you have something in mind for this nexus event, Lex said slowly, his interest in the matter growing. Oh, you have no idea, she responded, a smile growing on her face. Chapter 954, Your Own Answers. Lex did not ask what she had in mind. Since the topic had clearly reached this point, she would talk about it, but he had to maintain his psychological advantage. As a baby, every little bit of help counted, especially when dealing with an unknown phenomena that would potentially affect the whole universe. Technically, Vera had not said that yet, but if even destiny could fail, Lex could only imagine that the repercussions were large. Also, he still did not have a complete grasp of what destiny was. Was it a rank? Was it fate? Was it the name of a universal escort lady? Who knew? Vera did not keep him waiting for long. For now, you don't need to concern yourself with the nexus event. It is still far away. But it was still important to tell you about it. You see, there is kind of an unwritten rule in the divination community about it. We don't really tell non-diviners about it, while we make sure to spread the word about it as much as possible within the divination community. You see, for us diviners, oracles, and such, the nexus is a great opportunity. You've already helped some of us remove shards of tribulation from our souls, so you know that we get punished heavily for divining certain things. But during the nexus event, not only can we divine as we please, we can remove any punishments we're already suffering. Most importantly, we can change what fate has in store for us. What does that mean? Lex asked. He could tell that Vera was putting a lot of emphasis on this last part. Changing one's fate or destiny seemed like a big deal, but how would you even know what your existing fate was? Or that the one you were getting was better? The nexus event is far away, she said, not directly answering his question. Right now, we have only detected the fringes of its existence in our divinations. That means there's plenty of time for you to look into this, and get the answers you want. The reason no one else can give you a proper answer is because there is no one correct answer. You just have to see what you can dig up. Vera simply nodded, as she continued to look out the window. Once he was out, Lex had to decide between going fishing and cultivating first. On one hand, it was best to gain as much information as possible. On the other hand, he was in no condition to do anything even if he gained extremely critical information. He ultimately decided to go through one round of cultivation before heading to the well. He teleported to his apartment, and returned to his humble meditation mat of a technically living heavenly immortal dragon. It felt good to be back. But then he was suddenly reminded of the dream he had about being hunted by a massive dragon. Maybe he should start looking into some dragon-slaying techniques. For now, though, he closed his eyes and began cultivation. It was a painful process to start, because his meridians were extremely sore. Even the slightest of stimulation sent waves of pain coursing through his body. But he endured in silence. His body would heal from all wounds, so there was no reason to fear getting hurt. Of course, if his golden core was in danger he would not take the same risk, but it did not seem to be under any pressure, so he continued to cultivate through the pain. Eventually, he would be stronger for it. He was the literal manifestation of the idiom, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." Going through one cycle took him 3 hours, as even though he ignored it, the pain slowed him down. But this was not enough to have his body adapt to its conditions, so he continued. Whether it was the strain his body was suffering, the dragon's might around him, the toughness and vitality of the dragon beneath him, his cultivation technique took them all in, and slowly started to make him better for it. What his physique could do for others, his cultivation technique could do for himself, so he continued to train. What he didn't know was that his physique had imparted some of the benefits he had on to the countless workers who traveled back to the inn with him. Slowly, they were all improving. Chapter 955 Picnic at the Well. Lex suddenly started to cough as he completed his most recent cycle of cultivation, and felt something big stuck in his throat. When plain coughing didn't work, he started smashing his chest with a fist to try and get the blocked bulge to move up. It worked surprisingly well, and a moment later, he coughed out a large misshapen chunk of meat. He would have thought he had just thrown up a part of his lung if he hadn't continued to breathe just fine as soon as he coughed it out. Unlike previous times, when the extracting impurities from his body were black and in the form of sludge, this time his body had discarded a lot of damaged tissue, muscle, and other internal organs and grew new ones in their stead. It was something he instinctively knew, but it still felt eerie to look at a ball of red meat that came out of his own body. With a wave of his hand, he caused the meat to disappear so that he would not have to look at it anymore. "I guess that's my cue to stop," he murmured as he wiped the blood off his face. Cultivation was too addictive, so although he had only meant to do it for a short while, he ended up cultivating for a day straight. On the bright side, the condition had improved drastically, and most of the aches filling his body had been fixed. Only his meridians were still damaged, and he had a feeling he would need to cultivate a lot more before that was fixed. He got up and stretched his body a bit before getting ready to go fishing. He was not particularly in the mood to explain why he, as a baby, could walk and talk, so he put on his Clark Kent glasses and donned his Leo persona. Despite his actual body's miniature size, Leo still appeared as he had always been. It was quite refreshing. He teleported away, and when he reappeared, he was already at the wishing well. But, unsurprisingly, it was not as secluded as many of the other parts of the inn. Bloody hell, this was immortal-level material. "Young man, it seems like you have good eyesight," said the man who fished out the charcoal as he lifted it with his spirit sense and brought it close to himself to admire. "Does the well always give things this valuable?" Leo asked. He recalled that it had fished out a system before, and now it had fished out a very rare material that could be used to create ink for immortal-level talismans. Maybe he had made the well wait too long before trying it himself. "No, most of the time the items are worthless. But if you fish enough, you're bound to get something good. It's a nice pastime." "Next is my turn," said the man with gray hair as he grabbed the rod and flung the hook into the well. "To be honest, the most valuable thing I found myself is not too useful for me." It was a pill that could help a nascent cultivator in their cultivation. Most items are far below even that in value. But the novelty of the well just never wears off. It's great value. Plus, no matter how we try, we can't use divination to predict what we'll get. It's quite interesting. "Oh, you two are diviners?" Leo asked, as he summoned a lawn chair and sat beside the two old men. "Yes, some time ago, we accompanied some brats here for a big event. The timing was pretty great, for our realms went to war while we were gone. It was crazy how suddenly it happened. Even we hadn't predicted it, but now back home everyone thinks we saw it coming and ran away. Whatever, we were long overdue for a vacation anyway." Leo raised an eyebrow. So far, all he had heard was about the things these two couldn't predict. Were they really diviners? Chapter 956 Library of Heaven. "My name is Leo," he finally introduced himself after deciding it did not matter if they were charlatans or real diviners. It wasn't as if he was there for that. "Bergen," said the man who pulled out the basin charcoal. "Harambe," said the old man with gray hair, who was fishing. "Are you guys planning on staying at the inn for a while?" Leo asked, curious about their plans. There were only a few guests left at the inn, so he could finally take some time to get to know his guests once more. Well, we need to decide what we're going to be doing first. Do we head back, do we wait, do we try to help in some other way, said Bergen while he stored his newfound treasure away. If it were any other emergency, I'd say we sit and take a vacation, Harambe chimed in. But a realm war is different. If we don't report back at all, the realm owners may put bounties out on us and declare us criminals. It's very annoying. Leo took this opportunity to ask many questions about realm wars, since the two of them seemed knowledgeable. It could help him a lot once his own realm was formed. While they did not specifically name their realm, they did let him know that the highest cultivation level in their realm was heavenly immortal, and the realm at war with them was similar. Their war did not seem to be anywhere near the scale of realm wars discussed by Cassandra, but it was brutal nonetheless. Another interesting thing that Lex learned was that compared to the origin realm, the time in their realm seemed to pass by faster. Time difference was something he had not experienced yet, but he wondered if his new realm would exhibit it. Pull quickly. If you let it wait, the line will snap, both the old men exclaimed, and Leo did just that. The resistance he felt was extremely familiar. It wasn't that of something resisting his line and trying to escape. Instead, it was spatial friction. He channeled his spirit sense through the line and eased its passage, until he finally managed to pull out a book. To his great and genuine surprise, the hardcover book he had pulled out was written in English, and was titled The Effects of Concentrated Spiritual Energy on Inanimate, Soul Dead, and Crafted Objects. The name of the author was missing, but a quick search through the pages revealed that the book was extremely well formatted, and seemed to discuss things in great detail. Hey, that's a good find, Bergen said, as he looked at the book in Leo's hand with interest. From the looks of it, that's a book from the Library of Heaven. Harambe exclaimed. Hey kid, if you manage to return one of their lost books, you could potentially even get a free membership. For a moment Leo thought they were just consoling him since all he found was a book, but the envy in their eyes seemed all too real, not to mention that their gaze was fixed on the book. What's the Library of Heaven? He asked, wondering if Vera meant for him to find this book, or get access to that library. Maybe the reward was actually both. It's a living library. It has the largest repository of knowledge in the entire universe. It moves from place to place, so I can't tell you where it might be. But if you ever come across it, and return one of its books, you'll at least get a reward if not a membership. Once you're a member, you can access the library from anywhere in the universe. Chapter 957, Getting Down to Business. Leo nodded along to the two as he switched with Bergen, and sat down on his lawn chair. The two friends began to talk again with one another, while Lex began to read through the book. With his speed, reading the whole book in a detailed and thorough manner would not take more than a couple of hours at most. It was quite educational, and started to discuss not only what happened when certain objects were put in energy-dense places, but why that happened as well. It was quite interesting, because it immediately made him think of Kawain, the inn's resident sword expert, who also happened to be a sword. His appearance was very misleading because he looked like a human, but he only did that with his powers since he was an immortal. In truth, was and remained even now a sword that had gained self-awareness and then had cultivated itself. This was a result of the sword binge, exposed to some extremely unusual energy types in very high concentration. Before he could read the book much further, and delve into the secrets it held, the two old men called him because it was his turn yet again. Just to be sure that he did not miss any opportunities, he put the book away for now and decided to continue fishing. Who knew, maybe he could gain something extremely valuable or interesting. Later, when he was convinced he had taken all the benefits that the well had to offer, for a short time at least, he would once again continue reading the book. He had not forgotten that soon, the entire inn would be flooded with incredible energy. For hours, the three continued to fish and chat with one another. The family that was having a picnic nearby came in, and as it turned out they were a part of the old men's retinue. They brought more food, which Leo no longer rejected since it wasn't from his failure of a cook apparently. It went beyond just certain items coming to life. It elaborated on how certain treasures were born, how to predict the kind of treasures that would be created as well as their grade, and so much more. Lex originally thought he could go through the whole book in a couple of hours, but he was wrong. The size of the book was deceiving, and the knowledge it contained was extensive. After several hours of reading, he had to take a break, not only to contemplate on what he learnt, but also to cultivate. After that, he would need to start taking precautions. He had just realized that his inn was perfectly primed for almost everything to either come to life, or turn into extremely valuable treasures. That in itself was not an issue, but there was no way in hell that Lex was just going to sit around and let his cultivation mat, also known as the dragon he frequently sat on, come to life. Was that the reason that the inn was destroyed in his visions? The dragon came to life, destroyed the inn, and then ran away. Many years later, it would track him down and kill him? That seemed a little far-fetched, which is exactly why Lex believed it could happen. Because only absolutely crazy and absurd things happened to him. Since when has his life made sense? He began cultivating, and just like that, another day passed him by. He was getting closer and closer to the day of the new realm being born. He could not help but feel excited, but then he suppressed that excitement. He teleported to his office, and put on his host attire. It was time for the innkeeper to get down to business, starting with meeting the sovereign turtle. From what he recalled, he had a clone tree of a very powerful celestial immortal in his inn. He needed to make sure that would not turn into a problem for him, and it would be just one of many things he needed to address. Chapter 958 Let Them Sleep. The galactic sovereign turtle showed up with an entire entourage in tow. Atop its shell sat Zen, the small sentient patch of grass which had reached the immortal level but had a very weak body, in a flowering pot. Young MacDonald, the reincarnation of Ijashima, and the plant responsible for the vast network of vines underneath the inn also came along, somehow detached from the rest of its body. Little Blue, who had gotten much larger now, was happily swimming in the air around the turtle. It had a few streaks of gold on its skin, as well as a couple of unusual and probably unfinished growths on its back. It looked like it was about to sprout wings. The gardener, who had been absent from the inn for a very long time, was also following along. He seemed happy, for once, rather than upset over his ruined art. A few dozen workers followed along as well, most of whom Lex was meeting as the innkeeper for the first time. This was, more or less, the main workforce for the greenhouse, or at least the upper management of it. Among just insects, there were over 13 million worms, around 2 million bees, and just as many butterflies and ladybugs. There were also countless beasts, and 2 interns who were actually guests, but had become addicted to working at the greenhouse. A scan of them had revealed that they were actually werewolves. There were countless other workers as well now, considering that the greenhouse had grown massive in size. Just tending to the plants every day was a massive task, despite the automation of the inn. Besides, sprinkling all the plants with water from the well of invigoration, which could boost plant growth, was something that needed to be done manually. Lightsville Omicron M. Welcome everyone. I'm glad you all came as quickly as possible, said the innkeeper, his relaxing tone tinged with a hint of urgency. As you all know, the inn is about to undergo a massive renovation, and that will be followed by an as of yet unprecedented wave of energy. To avoid every single blade of grass and fallen leaf becoming sentient, as well as the rest of the flora, we will need to take many precautions, so we have no time to lose. For the most part, I will let you decide on your own what precautions you want to take, but Turtle, you will need to put the clone tree in the greenhouse to sleep. You must order the tree to go into a deep, deep slumber from which it won't wake up anytime soon. But you have to do so in exactly 10 days, right before the big change. Are you sure that's a wise idea? Do you know how many blades of grass alone there are in the entire inn, let alone trees, vines, bushes, shrubs, moss, and more? Will you be able to control all of them if they all wake up? The turtle summoned forth a vine and used it to rub its chin, as if it was thinking. But it did not take long to come to a conclusion. Sleeping is good for children's growth, the turtle said, as if content to let the plants stay dormant. But we need some to awaken. Without nymphs, tree spirits, dryads, and spring fairies, it will be difficult to grow magical plants. Which is why I'm allowing you to pick who to wake up, the innkeeper said, as if this was a part of his plan all along. The discussion began with all of the plant folk chiming in. They were surprisingly organized and well informed about which plants were the most likely to wake up, even now. They were also extensively educated about what type of mutations the plants were most likely to undergo if they woke up. Their meeting lasted for hours because the flora was just too diverse, and the turtle wanted at least one of each type of plant to wake up. When it finally ended, they finally exited, and another group of workers was ready to come in. Gerard, Velma, Luther, and Hera walked in. They were next. Chapter 959 Sentience Facilitation and Inhibition. Gerard, Luther, and Velma were used to meeting the innkeeper, and while they remained respectful, they were not nervous. Hera, on the other hand, was incredibly nervous, though she was trying not to show it. She was no longer nearly as ignorant as she once was, and now understood exactly what kind of entity the innkeeper was. The Midnight Inn was much more powerful than the Jotun Empire, at least as far as she knew. The inn used to be filled with countless soldiers from the Empire when it was still operating normally, and even they remained completely respectful of the inn's workers. Moreover, as she spent time with more of the workers, she got to hear more and more of their gossip, though the poor fellows did not even realize they were gossiping. The Emperor of the Jotun Empire had come to the inn with his wife, and spent a very long time here. The devils, who seemed to have surpassed the Jotun Empire as well, also filled the inn, and remained respectful as well. In fact, she was sometimes unnerved by how respectful these overwhelmingly strong fellows were to her. She did not even know the names of the realms they were in, that is how weak she was comparatively. That was because the respect was not earned by her, but came due to the ever-grand prestige of the innkeeper. "Welcome all of you," said the innkeeper, his voice calm and confident, his figure tall and magnificent. "We have important matters to discuss, so please have a seat." Lightsville Omicron the innkeeper waved his hand, and a cup of tea appeared in front of all of them. The tea was nothing too special. It only had the effect of calming the emotions of whoever drank it. Hera's nervousness was apparent at a glance, but instead of singling her out or telling her to relax, he just offered everyone tea. But items that could gain sentience were only the beginning of the meeting. There was so much more planning that was needed. Among others, we have 2 rhinocentaurs as prisoners. Suffice to say, there is no point in letting them experience the benefits of the upgrade. Think of a way to block them as best as you can. What are we planning on doing with those 2 prisoners? Luther asked hesitantly. Leo, or rather Lex, was supposed to interrogate them, but he never got around to it. They're from a powerful organization. They're being used as bait to see how the organization behind them reacts. Will they negotiate their freedom or find a way to retaliate? Just keep them as prisoners for now. More importantly, how many golf carts should we allow to gain sentience? This is something you will need to think of carefully, Gerard, for they will be under you in the security department. Velma, I want you to carefully document this entire process and place all the records you make in the library. This will be a part of the Midnight Inn's chronicles, so be sure to be thorough. The meeting continued for hours more, and Lex was eventually forced to end it early so that they would not become completely overwhelmed by this entire process. He would just handle the tasks, he hadn't been able to assign them himself. Lex teleported back to the dragon, and began reading the book once more. He wanted to learn as much from it as possible, for the book was giving him insight he never would have achieved on his own. Chapter 968 Chat. Another couple of days passed by while Lex made preparations. He tried to find out what would happen to the countless minor realms attached to the inn when the inn became a realm of its own, but there was no one to ask. Mary didn't have the answer either. He had to individually set up certain protective formations around many of the guests who were still experiencing a breakthrough, or in deep cultivation. It cost him a lot of MP, but there was nothing that could be done. A drastic change in the environment might cause their cultivation to destabilize, which was something he wanted to avoid. He was also curious about whether or not the Henali portal would continue to work once they moved to a new realm. he'd have to wait to find out. Besides that, he had to make sure he was ready for his breakthrough to the nascent realm as well. This would be a very important breakthrough for him, especially since it would bring about changes in his relationship with the system. He had already made plans for how he would deal with that, though he did not mention it to anyone yet, Mary included. As a result, he spent more time cultivating. The pain in his meridians was reducing and he was getting closer and closer to the breakthrough. It was perfect. A few more days went by, and just 5 days before the change, the inn took on an ominous silence. There was a subtle, suppressive aura that permeated the grounds. The guests and the workers both noticed it. The change caused some guests to feel uncomfortable, and they began considering leaving the inn. But besides assuring them that there was nothing amiss, and that the inn was on the verge of major renovations, the guests were provided no extra information. Ultimately, none of them left, but they were incredibly unsure of the future. She also wanted to go to the Crystal Realm and meet with the king the innkeeper told her about, but since the inn was currently sealed it was not an option. She did, however, make it a priority. Even if experiencing the birth of a new realm allowed her to become a Tao Lord herself, she would still do that. The wishing well is also interesting. The concept is extremely complex, but it's ingeniously done. I never thought someone would use such difficult laws to create a novelty item. Well, this is an inn. We have to give our guests something to entertain themselves with. It is quite an interesting inn. Very different from any I've visited before. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Lex asked while chuckling. He wouldn't mind getting some advice from her if she had any. It was always good to hear outside ideas and external views. It's neither good nor bad. Most inns I visited were just places to rest while I performed some other task. The purpose of this inn seems more like visiting the inn itself is the main goal, not that it takes away from its ability to allow guests to rest while they perform other tasks. In fact, it's quite convenient, in a sense, since it can be accessed from anywhere, theoretically. Lex simply nodded. It was not his intention to turn the inn into a vacation spot rather than just an inn. But the more options his guests had to spend MP on, the more he had to work with. In the end, this was the end result. But like Cassandra said, it was not like that took away from the inn's ability to simply function as a hotel, at least when it was open to the public. He sat down and chatted with her for a while. After this, neither he nor she would have the time to sit and converse like this for a long time.